Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, and welcome to Linda's Conscious Talks, and I'm your host, Linda Summers, and we've got another great show for you today as we welcome back Dr. Dubroff today again, and our topic is The Body Can Heal Itself, Transforming the Placebo Effects into Real Medical Treatments. And for those of you who are just joining us today and missed last week, Monday on the 8th, we had on Dr. Dubroff, and the topic was naturopathy medicine, how the body can heal itself. So I would like to give a little bit of background information for those of you who missed our show. Dr. Dubroff received his bachelor's in biology at the University of Massachusetts in Boston in 1997. He attained his doctorate in naturopathy from the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Portland, Oregon in 2002. Naturopaths are recognized as primary care doctors in the state of California. Dr. Dubroff is an alternative doctor and practices a three-pronged approach to holistic medicine. Scientific evidence-based botanical nutritional medicine stimulating the individual's natural resources to heal, and diet and lifestyle to promote and ensure health and wellness. Dr. Dubroff completed a year-long residency in mental health and homeopathic applications during his schooling at NCNM. He has given many lectures in the community as well as hospital and other medical settings. He has also designed a year-long CME course on alternative medical applications for mental health professionals. Dr. Dubroff started his clinical practice in Portland, Oregon, where he served as a preceptor doctor training students in homeopathy for NCNM. He moved to Los Angeles in 2007 to work with an orthopedic surgeon for 2 years before starting his own practice in Orange County and San Diego County. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Dubroff back to the show. Hi.
Hi, Linda. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here again. I appreciate it. We've got you the whole month, so this is wonderful. There's a lot to talk about. I mean, we could probably talk longer than a month, but, yeah, there's a lot to talk about. So, yeah, thanks again for joining us. And we had great conversations last week about what naturopathy medicine is and, and how that is with diet, lifestyle, and different resources to be able to help assist another person. And then today we're talking about transforming the placebo effects into real medical treatment. So I'd really kind of like to begin there as far as the topic, like what really is, when you're saying that transforming the placebo effects into real medical treatments, what does that look like? What is that?
Well, I mean, the placebo effect is something that, first start off with an explanation of placebo effect for those that might not be familiar with it. Whenever medical research, conducts a study, it compares it to a treatment that isn't expected to get results. So, for instance, maybe 100 people take a pill of the actual medicine, and another 100 people take a pill that is absolutely nothing, some sugar. And the people, an important result for the researchers is, does the medicine actually get better results than the sugar pill? And the idea is that when you look at the statistics, it's just that people taking a sugar pill get results. And this is pretty much across all research, just about. I'm not sure if it's all. I'm sure there are some things that perhaps might not be the case. But it's generally known within the medical community as across all research. And therefore, this says that people are engaging in some process where they're getting a healing response. But here, the placebo effect is deceptive upon the individual, and that the individual thinks, oh, maybe I'm going to get the right medicine, and they think they are, and in that thought, they start to heal. And what we never ask ourselves is, well, okay, that process is there, and how can that process be an actual medical application? How can it actually take us where we want? And it clearly states that, we have the power to heal, which I think sometimes is forgotten in many ways.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Well, what's interesting, too, is when you talked about the placebo, with people taking the sugar pill, what really came to mind is, do you feel that it's really in our mind that if we really think that, which the mind is so powerful, we know that, what we think we create, but do you think that's where that's coming from, as this placebo effect, that the sugar pill is helping because of that?
too, and this gets into other conversations we've had, and I think this is where it gets complicated, and just that, we're, at least with the placebo effect, and some of this, we're potentially talking about an unconscious process, I'm not all that religious, but I am spiritual, and the idea of, the acquisition of faith, to get somewhere that you might not recognize in yourself now, but it's, the healing place to be, it takes a certain amount of, unconscious faith in that prospect. And, it's kind of my belief that, whether you're looking at thermodynamics or theory of relativity or, all sorts of other physical things, just to name a few that people are familiar, there's a lot of suggestions that all energy is unified, which is, basically thermodynamics and E equals mc squared, theory of relativity and stuff like that. So that, I think, while people do have the power to heal, there is also, I think that's always got to be tempered with the idea that, what is the state of the environment in general and the interactions with people. But I think, when you put that energy and you reserve that energy to that personal process, I think it's pretty clear that you can heal. And from that, if you want, research, or people want to read some really interesting books, there's one book, I guess this is just coming from a meditative, personal inquiry, moving one's energies kind of thing, prayer. There's a doctor called Larry Dossey Jr., and he wrote 2 books. I forget the name of one of them. One of them is all the research on quote-unquote prayer. He doesn't really quantify prayer as Christian mysticism. He just quantifies it as, an event where you're praying on that. You're asking for a healing, or you're believing in God, or in the faith maneuver there. But one book says, what's the research on anything from, praying on Petri dishes with cancer cells and watching them heal, to, communication across a certain barrier that you wouldn't think between 2 people in 2 different rooms, for instance. So one book is that actual research, and the other book, which I do remember the name as I read it, is called Prayer is Good Medicine, and it says, well, based on that research, we can analyze that research and say, this is the way we should pray, or this is how we should go about, a spiritual process is to entertain better health. From that primordial ability to stimulate oneself to become something different or to heal. So great book.
Interesting. So going back to so if the process is there in these medical studies, and so how is it recognized? I mean, because then you say, how can it take us where we want to go? So is it even recognized in the medical field that this is actually a way that that we can heal ourselves, that the body can heal itself? Because really it is the body healing itself.
Yeah, it is. Without a doubt, it must be. I don't know if it's recognized. I think a lot of, it's hard to say, and I don't want to speak for any individual portions of the population, whether they be, firemen or doctors or Indian chiefs or homeless people. But I sometimes think people don't see this as favorable, or what it would be necessary to entertain this, isn't readily sought. Because I do think it takes a lot of energy. It's not something, I think people a lot of times think it's going to be really simple. But the change to recognize what you have in you, and to recognize where you want to go, those are both difficult things. And so, if you don't know what is contained in you, you can't communicate with it properly. Otherwise, it might come out muffled, it might come out redirected onto another individual or even a physical object. It might come out as anxiety that one can't control. And a lot of times, too, we could say, well, this might have a biochemical link, and perhaps it does. It becomes very difficult to do there, and it really takes time and investment in using different, spiritual practices to ascertain that, entertain that. And I think when I came up with this title, it wasn't only that, meditation. There's also things like classical homeopathy. There's things like cranial sacral therapy. There's things like clinical nutrition. I guess this subject's a lot more interesting, though, as it is the raw deal, and it doesn't take anyone else's involvement. I guess that's a real important point. If we're going to talk about the placebo effect, it's not something that I could sell to you, even if it's just hands-on healing. It's not. I don't think it's that somebody needs to heal you. Someone might be really good at that, but it's important to understand that process is available to people. But I guess their sight or their awareness must be willing to accept all things and be able to, come to terms with kind of where things are at, so they can process that and have a vision for that, that it's going to be promoting a life instinct as opposed to a death instinct, which was something that Sigmund Freud talked about, though.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to, you said something about what is contained in you. Can you expand on that? I mean, it's a question that just came up for me, so I would think the listeners maybe want to have an idea of what you're referring to when you say contained in you.
I guess what I was saying by that is I think people take for granted that that what shows evidently to their consciousness isn't necessarily everything that's going on. That there's a lot underneath the waters that one might not be aware of. When I was young, I remember, from a very early age, thinking, I looked around myself and I said, okay, well, I've got a lot of problems and I've got a lot of stress, and I looked at other people, whether it be my parents or friends, and said, okay, well, this person doesn't make sense in this area, and I don't know if I can trust this person. And I think everyone's aware of that. I think as you get to be an adult at a certain age, you just start to realize that people aren't that always coherent in every way. I think I realized from that standpoint that if I can look at everyone else and say they're not coherent, then it became just an easy deduction for me to say I must not be coherent either. I mean, if I can look out there and say people are not coherent, I must not be coherent. It's kind of law of probabilities. If everyone else is a little askew, I must not be either. And at that moment, I started asking myself, how do you find something that at the time I posed it as lying to yourself? How do you find when you're lying to yourself? You know what I mean? If you're going to discover what you are, you have to first figure out the communication from the depths. And until you can do that, you're more reactive, and it's harder to ascertain, where things are coming from. And so for me, it was sort of like, oh, well, I became used to feeling some feeling in my inner dialogue that felt wrong. Not wrong in its state, but in its feeling. It felt wrong. And then I would just slow everything down. I was slow on communication with myself, and then I would find some content that was just completely out of place. Self-defeating, self-degrading, things like that I didn't really recognize. But then once I slowed everything down, I was like, oh, of course, that feeling was me being not as good as I could be, I guess. And so when I said what's inside yourself, that's what I mean, is that I don't think it's, it's always so clear. I think it takes a little investigation.
I love that. I mean, it's so interesting and fascinating to think at certain ages, that age that you were, to even have contemplated or even thought of that process. Most kids just kind of go about their business or whatever, but you actually took it to a completely different level, which, no wonder what you're doing and helping people. You know what I mean? It just really kind of puts everything together, It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and it's interesting stuff. And I think I had this. I have a friend that's kind of it has a really advanced cancer. So we have lots of conversations about, there's an inevitable truth in all things. So whether this is going to be the end result or not, it is what it is. It's natural. And we were at a restaurant, and I walked. This was just such a great conversation. I loved this conversation. I walked in this bathroom, and I saw this guy there, and I was like, I had these feelings about him, like he was something I didn't like. And I think it came natural to me to say, look at the way he holds himself. Look at the way his mouth is curved. Look at the tie he's wearing. And then I was like, you just like, that's wrong. I shouldn't do that. So I approached him, by the sinks. I was like, hi, how are you? And he said, hi, how are you? And I said, oh, great. I said, oh, well, and I finished washing myself. I said, have a great week. And I walked out, and it wasn't like I noticed a great exchange with him. But then when I sat down with my friend, I talked about them. I said, you know what? It was a real mystical experience because she just outright made this statement prior to me saying it that showed my defilement of nature. And it was the most beautiful thing because I wanted to tell her the story, but instead I wish I could remember what she said. It was something to the, I forget what it was, but what it brought up in me was that we transgress against people. You know what I mean? And I know it's very biblical, but we do. We transgress in our sight of them. And
what do you mean by transgress?
We see them as poor and
okay.
monstrous and all these qualities, and we see it as them. But in reality, it's us saying it to them. It's hard to know. And it occurred to me at that time with her that only probably happens because people share that feeling by some extent. He very well, it's sort of like the same thing. If you're going to be attracted to a woman or a man, I think a lot of the times if that attraction is real, you're both feeling it by some extent, right? Otherwise, maybe this isn't accurate, but it's just my thought. Otherwise, it's just not really there. It's just, a pure lustful situation for some physical nature of the individual. If you can differentiate between a real, true spiritual connection with someone, when you get that, I think it's real and I think it's felt between both people. But there is a situation where two personalities are dissimilar and therefore receive each other as a threat onto each other. They share this experience, but at the same time, they wouldn't be able to fully recognize that they are doing this. This might be my significant other. She might interrupt me for a second. Hold on 1 second. Hey, I'm actually doing a radio show, okay? Well, I'm on a radio show. Okay, I'll be on. I've told you that and told her that. Okay, babe, I'm half an hour. Babe, I'm on the radio. I'll be back in half an hour. Babe, I'll be back. Sorry about that. And she sometimes forgets what I had said. But anyways, the idea is that people don't. No, totally lost my sense of track of thought.
Well, we're talking about
people just share a poor experience of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and not understanding that because it's shared amongst themselves, they think there's no solution. If it was just something as noticing a flaw in someone, they could fix it. But instead, I think it's in the same way that love is experienced by people, there's all a range of emotions that can be shared by people. So if you don't have that faith aspect to try to find something, which is very difficult because I think people will mimic each other, people will share states. So then you don't even know that it's actually there. How would you track back from that?
Right. Fascinating. Really fascinating. It really ties in with the body healing itself because really it's healing at so many levels and getting back to, you talked about the cancer patient and things like that. So you do a lot of modalities, and next week we're going to talk about classical homeopathy. but you also do prolotherapy and things like that. How does that play a role in all of this of how the body can heal itself?
Prolotherapy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Prolotherapy is a therapy that can, it's a needle procedure where you're injecting at the interface of the bone and the ligament or and such, or some connective tissue, ligament, tendon, cartilage. And you're just injecting dextrose, which is a sugar, and this causes an inflammation to the tissue, and then via research it stimulates something called cytokines, which are kind of the messengers of the body. They kind of move back and forth between, the immune system and the endocrine system and the nervous system, so they kind of prep the body to know what to do. So prolotherapy kind of regenerates tissue. So it's very curative in that aspect, as opposed to using just straight steroids, which only inhibit an inflammatory response.
Right.
Without bringing some, healing measure to the tissues.
Mm-hmm. I feel like going back to really that story and what you were talking about, because I feel in that situation and really all situations, the body healing itself, and, when we start off that conversation of what is contained in you and realizing that, and we talked about the placebo effect, and so when there's an illness, and if we can, use an example as your friend that has the cancer. So do we exhaust all of our abilities to be able to help that person, and is it where that person has to have, when we're going to leave this planet, that's just, I guess there's maybe no control over that. Is there where we can ourselves have that desire within ourselves to be able to think differently and have a different outcome, if that makes sense? I really kind of want to dive over.
Oh, yeah, quantum mechanics, I read a lot of books on physics and quantum mechanics and the observer effect, and unfortunately, because it would take me so long whenever I talk about this, I go through experiment after experiment just to prove my point. But basically, all the major physicists, whether it be Niels Bohr or Schrodinger with, Schrodinger's cat, which is, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear the tree? But Schrodinger was an actual physicist, atomic physicist, and, Richard Feynman, which worked on the atomic bomb. They explained what happens in subatomic physics, subatomic particles. God, it's hard to explain this without explaining some research. So basically, in the observer effect, what they found, just really quickly, I'll just cut to the chase of this one study and conclusion from it, is that when they call it the observer effect, is when you go to study a subatomic particle, you really can't do it because just the mere sight into it or watching it makes the subatomic particle change its behavior. And literally it will happen before the variable in the experiment to make it happen. So it breaks cause and effect. It happens before the time that it was meant to happen. So to now get at this idea of what some leading physicists said is what subatomic physics and what a lot of people call New Age physics says is that life probably via the observer effects and the different aspects of subatomic physics says it's sort of like a dinner party and everyone's sitting around hanging out and somebody says, well, it's green, and then from that moment it's green for everyone, and then the next person says, well, it's circular, and then at that point it's circular and it's green, and then and so on, and we start forming our reality as a shared experience. So when I said happiness or to be able to heal, well, if you could muster the energy, and therefore it would take a lot of time, you could do it. But at the same time, we are a part of each other, and that slightly losing track of where I was going with this.
But the idea is that we're interacting with each other. And what you think you might be doing might be a little more complex in the interweave of people. So, when are you using personal identity compared, I guess I call it kind of the breath of life. Who knows if it's a god or something, but something has breathed life in us. And if you read physics, there's some of the newer age physics, there's a lot of suggestion that which brings life into us is consistent across time, whether it be a theory of relativity, whether it be something called Feynman's lines, or whether it be chaos theory or morphic resonances, which are all different fields of study. But if you have the time, rewind this and listen to the little references of those sciences and go view what they mean, because they're mind-boggling. They literally mean we're all the same thing. And therefore, to heal yourself, that's what I mean. You have to, you can't just look at yourself as the sole proprietor of yourself. And if you also think about it, you don't always make sense onto yourself. We're all imperfect, and you have to separate yourself from your identity by some measure, so that you can become to see your identity, and therefore know what steps that you should take. But always, I think, unfortunately, and fortunately, there is a measure and balance point to probably all of the living situations as a whole.
Wow.
That isn't too complicated.
It's amazing. It's amazing. When people are going to listen back, it's just incredible. Well, we've got 3 minutes left, and so at least your website again.
Sure.
So people can get in touch with you.
Sure. It's holisticsolutions.com. And I guess they can reach me at 949-444-4884.
And that all that information, for those of you listening and will be listening afterwards, will be at the end of the video. And so I have the last question I have for you is, or unless there's something that you want to shout out and just really that's
go
on
ahead.
the top of your mind. Okay. Any advice or insight that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. we really have to learn how to see people for them and not for the differences, or not. We have to understand that a lot of the times we look at someone, we say, well, they could be better, or they could do this, they could do that. We're penetrating an intrusion upon them. Now, it doesn't mean that they couldn't be better. It doesn't mean that they're not doing something wrong. But we're also not approaching them in such a way that we communicate with them. And this communication is what we're talking about, right? A fluid environment to its many parts, right? It has to start out with a communication. And communication always needs to be a two-way street. Otherwise, there is no shared experience. And without shared experience, there really probably isn't much love. So we really do have to take the time to say, who is this person, and who are the feelings that I'm feeling from them that I'm probably transgressing against them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're not real or isn't real, but if you feel those things, you're also not giving them room to be something more than some very strong attached sensation that you're having of them.
Wow. Well said. I mean, that totally, really, it is, because we're putting our stuff onto them, really.
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
I love it, and I fully agree that it doesn't allow them space to really show you who they really are.
No, you can't just shout at someone about what you think about them, even if what you think about them is true. It's the shouting that is penetrating,
Oh, amazing. Well, we thank you so much again for coming to the show, and we'll have you on again next week. It was really just an amazing, just such a wealth of information, and just a different way to look at ourselves and other human beings. So I greatly appreciate really what you do in the world. It's amazing, because you do a lot more than just being a naturopathy physician. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I'm enjoying talking about all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to thank all the listeners that joined us today, all the ones that will be joining us via YouTube. Thank you so much. Please follow, subscribe, comment, and like us. And you can join us next week with Dr. Dubroff, June 15th, Monday at 8 p.m., same time. Our show then will be Classical Homeopathy, Transformational Healing. So look for us next week, again, with Dr. Dubroff, 8 p.m. And so we thank you all for joining us, and thank you again, Dr. Dubroff. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Bye.